The air tasted like metal and smoke, thick enough to sting my throat with every breath. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, their pitch rising and falling over the low rumble of the approaching fire. The sky above Riverton had turned an unnatural shade of orange, as if the sun had been swallowed by rust. I could hear the dry pop of burning pine trees far beyond our street. But it was getting closer. The Cascade Ridge Fire was no longer a headline, it was in our backyard. I moved through the living room in a blur, pulling important documents from the drawer, passports, birth certificates, the deed to the house, and shoving them into my canvas backpack. My hands shook so badly I dropped the envelope twice. Dylan's voice called from somewhere in the garage, muffled and urgent. Marissa, we've got 10 minutes. 10 minutes to decide what parts of your life are worth carrying in. What will be left for the flames to consume? I grabbed a framed photo of our kids from the mantel and tucked it between the folders. Then paused to scan the room. Every object seemed heavy with meaning. But the weight in my chest told me none of it mattered if we didn't get out alive. Dylan burst in, his face streaked with sweat and ash, clutching a weathered leather satchel I didn't recognize. He held it close to his chest like something fragile. "Truck's ready," he said, voice clipped. We didn't speak as we loaded our things. The heat outside was almost unbearable, as if the air itself was burning. Our dog whimpered in the backseat as Dylan sped down the narrow road away from the fire line. At the evacuation center, a high school gym already crowded with families and the sound of restless children, we found a corner near the bleachers. Dylan muttered something about checking on the truck and stepped outside. I sank onto the bleacher, my hands numb. That's when I noticed the satchel at my feet. He must have left it here. I don't know why I reached for it, maybe I was looking for bottled water or a flashlight. The zipper slid open easily. Inside, wrapped in a folded flannel shirt, was a single object. A silver-framed photograph of a woman. Her dark hair fell over one shoulder, her smile unguarded and warm. I didn't know her well, but I knew her name, Sienna Blake. Years ago, Dylan had mentioned her in passing, calling her a friend from Colorado. I had never met her. The photo wasn't small enough to be incidental. It was the kind of framed picture you'd display in your living room, not hide in a bag. There were no pictures of our children in there. No wedding photo. Just her. My throat tightened, not from the smoke but from something colder, heavier. I glanced toward the gym doors, half expecting Dylan to walk in and catch me holding it. Questions tumbled through my mind, each one darker than the last. Why her? Why now? Why was this the only thing he saved when our home was burning? The sirens outside faded into the background. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat, steady and accusing. As if it already knew the answer I was too afraid to face. I slid the photograph back into the flannel and zipped the satchel shut. My hands moving automatically, as if concealing it could also hide the questions clawing at my mind. Dylan returned moments later, his eyes scanning the crowded gym before landing on me. "Everything okay?" he asked. His tone was casual. But I noticed the way his gaze dropped quickly to the satchel at my feet. Like he was making sure it hadn't gone anywhere. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. He didn't push it. Instead, he sat beside me, elbows on his knees, staring straight ahead. For the next hour, we sat in an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional announcements from a volunteer updating us on the fire's progress. I watched Dylan from the corner of my eye. He wasn't checking his phone, wasn't speaking to anyone, just sitting there with that rigid Stillness that felt less like exhaustion and more like calculation. When I closed my eyes, Sienna's face flashed against the inside of my eyelids. I'd only seen her once before, in a group photo from Dylan's old job in Denver. She was standing beside him, a little too close for my comfort. But I hadn't said anything back then. We were newly married, and I'd convinced myself trust was stronger than jealousy. Over the years, her name came up maybe twice, always casually. As if she were just someone from the past. "Oh, Sienna texted me about that conference," he'd said once over dinner. His eyes still on his plate. Another time, he'd mentioned she'd moved somewhere far away. Though he never specified where. Those moments were small, almost forgettable. Until now. The air inside the gym was stuffy, heavy with the smell of sweat, smoke, and fear. People spoke in low voices, clinging to their children, checking their phones for updates. I tried to do the same, pulling mine from my pocket. But my thoughts kept circling back to that framed photograph. Not a picture on his phone. Not an old Polaroid tucked in a drawer. A framed photo, wrapped carefully, carried through a wildfire evacuation. At some point, Dylan stood and said he was going to get coffee from the volunteers in the hallway. The moment he disappeared from view, I picked up his leather satchel again. I didn't open it this time. I already knew what was inside, but I felt its weight. Both literal and metaphorical. My mind raced ahead, imagining explanations that ranged from the absurd to the devastating. Was it nostalgia? A memento from another life? Or was it something worse, proof that our marriage had always been crowded with a third person? A volunteer with a clipboard approached, handing me a slip of paper with our assigned cot number. As she walked away, I caught sight of Dylan in the hallway, talking to someone. His body was turned just enough that I couldn't see their face, but the way he leaned in, speaking low, set my nerves alight. When the person shifted, I saw a glimpse of auburn hair and a profile that looked disturbingly familiar. My breath caught. It couldn't be Sienna. Not here. Not now. Dylan turned suddenly, catching me looking, and raised a hand in a wave that felt forced. Almost like a warning. I waved back, my face frozen in something between a smile and a grimace. Inside, though, a new kind of heat was building, not from the fire outside, but from the possibility that the woman in that photograph was closer than I'd ever imagined. That night, the gym lights stayed on, casting everything in a sickly fluorescent glow. People shifted restlessly on cots, murmuring to each other in half whispers. I lay on my side, my back to Dylan, pretending to sleep while every nerve in my body stayed alert. He had fallen asleep quickly, or at least his breathing sounded like it. My eyes kept drifting to the satchel wedged between his cot and mine, as if it were a living thing that might crawl away in the night. Around midnight, I slipped out of my cot under the pretense of getting water. The hallway was cooler, quieter, but I could still hear the hum of portable generators outside. I wandered toward the registration tables where volunteers were still working, checking lists of evacuees. My heart pounded as I leaned casually over the counter, pretending to look for Wi-Fi instructions. "Has anyone named Sienna Blake checked in?" I asked, keeping my voice light, like it was an idle thought. The volunteer tapped at a tablet, then shook her head. "Not here, no. She could be at one of the other centers in Westbrook or Alder Creek." Alder Creek was only 15 miles away, far enough to be outside the immediate danger zone, close enough for Dylan to reach in under half an hour. The thought sat heavy in my stomach. I thanked the volunteer and made my way to the far end of the gym. near the exit doors that opened to the parking lot. From there, I could see the faint glow of the fire line in the distance, like a bruise on the horizon. I pulled out my phone, scrolling back through old text messages with Dylan, searching for any mention of Sienna. Nothing obvious, just a handful of vague work-related notes from years ago. But then I remembered the joint bank account we barely used anymore. I logged in, my fingers trembling, and scrolled through the most recent transactions. One stood out instantly, a payment 2 weeks ago to AC Utilities in Alder Creek. Utilities for a town we didn't live in. Utilities for a property Dylan had never mentioned. I was still staring at the screen when the gym doors creaked open. Dylan stepped in, his hair damp from the drizzle outside, and paused when he saw me. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. I slid the phone into my pocket before he could see the screen. "Just needed some air," I said. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary, as if trying to read my thoughts. Back in our cots, I kept my back to him. I could feel the space between us growing, not in inches but in years of withheld truths. My mind replayed the glimpse I'd caught in the hallway earlier, the auburn hair, the familiar profile. If Sienna wasn't here in Riverton, maybe she was close enough to draw him out into the smoke and chaos of the evacuation. As the gym settled into uneasy quiet again, a new sound reached me, the soft buzz of Dylan's phone on the cot. He didn't move. I glanced over my shoulder just enough to see the screen light up. A message preview flashed before it disappeared. "I'm safe. Waiting." No name. Just those 3 words. But they might as well have been a match dropped into the dry brush of my trust, ready to set everything alight. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. That message, "I'm safe. Waiting," kept replaying in my head, every word sounding like a confession he hadn't made out loud. I lay there, motionless, breathing slow, and even so he'd think I was asleep. Dylan didn't stir until just before dawn. I felt the cot shift as he stood up, the faint rustle of fabric as he reached for the satchel. My pulse quickened. He moved carefully, like a man trying not to wake someone, and then slipped quietly toward the exit. I counted to 30 before getting up. The gym was still dim, lit only by the emergency lights, most people curled under blankets. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the side door, staying far enough behind that I could see him without being seen. The air outside was damp and cold, laced with the bitter scent of burned wood. Ash crunched faintly under my shoes. Dylan walked quickly across the parking lot to his truck, glancing over his shoulder once. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it would give me away. He opened the driver's side door, placed the satchel on the seat, and climbed in. The engine rumbled to life. I ducked behind a row of SUVs, my breath catching in my throat. When his taillights disappeared onto the main road, I hurried to the far end of the lot where a cluster of volunteers were unloading supplies from a van. "Is there a bike anywhere I can borrow?" I asked one of them, improvising. One older man nodded toward a rack of donated items. "Check over there. Someone left a mountain bike yesterday." Minutes later, I was pedaling into the smoky morning, the cold air biting at my cheeks. The road to Alder Creek was eerily empty, lined with darkened houses and fields shrouded in haze. Dylan's truck was nowhere in sight. But I knew the route, it was the only way out that hadn't been blocked by fire crews. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept going, fueled by something sharper than adrenaline. About 40 minutes later, I reached the outskirts of Alder Creek. The town was quieter than Riverton, the evacuation orders here only partial. I slowed as I approached a row of older houses on a side street. That's when I saw it, Dylan's truck. Parked halfway up the driveway of a small blue house with peeling white trim. The satchel was gone from the front seat. I got off the bike and leaned it against a fence across the street. The curtains in the front window of the blue house shifted slightly. And a figure appeared, a woman, auburn hair tumbling over her shoulders. Wearing a faded sweatshirt, even from this distance, I recognized her from the photograph. Sienna Blake. She opened the door just as Dylan stepped inside. Carrying the satchel like it was something sacred. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. But there was something in the way she looked at him, not surprise, not relief. But expectation, as if she'd been waiting for him all along. I stayed there, frozen, my hands gripping the fence until my knuckles ached. The fire might have driven us out of our home. But what I was seeing now told me it had also driven him straight into the arms of a life I'd never known he had. The street was quiet except for the faint hum of a generator somewhere down the block. I waited until Dylan and Sienna disappeared deeper into the house before crossing the road. My sneakers made almost no sound on the damp pavement, but my heartbeat felt deafening. Every step toward that blue house was like walking into a place I wasn't supposed to exist. The front yard was small, edged with overgrown hydrangeas that shielded part of the porch. I crouched low and slipped along the side, stopping beneath an open window where the curtain swayed gently in the breeze. Voices drifted out, muted but clear enough to make out. They're saying the fire might reach Riverton by tonight, Dylan's voice. Calm, steady, like he was reading a weather report. Sienna's reply was softer, threaded with something almost intimate. You shouldn't have risked coming here. What if she followed you? My breath caught. She wouldn't, Dylan said quickly. She's busy with the kids, making sure they're settled. I told her I had to check on a work contact out here. There was a pause, then the faint sound of something metallic, maybe the clasp of the satchel. Sienna's voice again. You brought it? Of course, Dylan said, and I could hear the faint smile in his tone. I told you, I'd keep it safe no matter what. I had to grip the windowsill to keep from leaning in too far. Whatever was inside that satchel besides her photograph, was clearly more important to him than anything we owned together. Sienna's voice dropped to a near whisper, forcing me to strain to hear. I can't believe you still have it, after all these years. I thought maybe. She trailed off and the rest was lost in the shuffle of footsteps. I shifted, careful not to snap a twig in the damp grass. Dylan spoke again, closer to the window now. I told you, none of that changes how I feel. Not then, not now. The words hit me like a sudden rush of heat, the kind you feel standing too close to a bonfire. This wasn't an old flame rekindled out of nostalgia. It was something that had been burning quietly, steadily, all along. I eased back, my pulse roaring in my ears. From where I stood, I could just see through a gap in the curtain, Dylan handing her the satchel, Sienna cradling it in both arms like it was a newborn. She looked up at him, and the expression on her face told me she wasn't just some woman from his past. She was someone who expected him to keep choosing her, even now. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, signaling another shift in the fire's direction. But here, in the shadow of that blue house, the real danger wasn't the flames in the hills, it was the truth I was piecing together. One word, one look, one lie at a time. I backed away from the window before either of them could spot my shadow. My legs felt unsteady, the damp grass soaking into my knees. I moved toward the rear of the house, where a narrow gravel path led to a small detached garage. The side door was ajar, and from inside came the faint scent of motor oil and cedar. I slipped in, my breath shallow, my ears tuned for footsteps. Through the thin wall, I could still hear the muffled rhythm of their voices inside the main house, but now there was something else, the creak of hinges, a soft metallic click. I imagined Sienna opening the satchel, the same way I had in the gym. Except now I was desperate to know what else it held. I scanned the garage. A workbench cluttered with tools sat under a dusty window. In the corner, an old coat rack leaned under the weight of jackets and scarves. On a hook near the door hung a set of keys. I recognized the silver fob immediately, Dylan's truck key, along with two others I'd never seen before. I took them without thinking. My hands moved on instinct. The same way you grab a railing when you stumble. Then I slipped back outside and crept toward the truck parked in the driveway. The early morning mist clung to the windshield. My fingers shook as I slid the key into the lock and pulled the door open just enough to slip inside. The satchel wasn't there, of course it wasn't. But in the glove compartment, buried under registration papers, I found a smaller leather pouch. I unzipped it, half expecting more photographs. Instead, there were documents, a birth certificate, school enrollment forms, and medical records. The name at the top stopped my breath cold, Eliot Blake. The child's date of birth was 8 years ago. The father's name listed in bold, Dylan Calloway. My stomach lurched. I shuffled through the papers, each one confirming what the last suggested. This wasn't some fleeting affair or long-lost friendship. This was a second life, complete with a child I had never known existed. A son. His son. Somewhere inside the house, a door opened and closed. Panic surged through me. I shoved the papers back into the pouch and tucked it under my jacket. Then I slid out of the truck and hurried toward the side street where my borrowed bike waited. My pulse loud enough to drown out the world. As I pedaled away, the truth pressed down on me like the smoke in the air, heavy, suffocating, inescapable. Dylan hadn't just saved a photograph from the fire. He'd been saving a family. Just not ours. By the time I reached Riverton, the sun had climbed high enough to pierce the smoke, casting everything in a strange amber glow. The gym buzzed with restless energy. Word had spread that the fire was moving faster than expected. Dylan was already back, sitting on the edge of his cot with the satchel beside him. His posture casual, too casual. I walked straight up to him, my heart thudding but my voice steady. "We need to talk. Outside." He hesitated, glancing at the satchel like he was weighing whether to bring it. Finally, he stood, following me out into the cold parking lot. We stopped near the chain-link fence at the far end, away from the noise. "I went to Alder Creek this morning," I said. His eyes flickered, just for a second. "You what?" "I saw her," I continued. "Sienna. And I saw what you've been keeping from me." I pulled the leather pouch from inside my jacket and dropped it between us. The papers fanned out slightly, Eliot's name visible in bold. 8 years, Dylan. 8 years of lying. You didn't just cheat, you built an entire life behind my back. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I didn't want you to find out like this." "How should I have found out?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care who heard. "In another 8 years? At his high school graduation?" He looked down at the papers, then back at me. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Sienna and we never planned for it. But once Eliot was born, I couldn't just walk away." The words hit like stones, but beneath the hurt was a clarity I hadn't felt before. And what about me? Our kids? Did you plan for them? He exhaled slowly, the kind of sigh you give when you've already made a decision. Marissa, I think we both know we've been done for a long time. For a moment, the smoke in the air seemed to thicken, blurring the edges of everything. But then, something inside me shifted. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. His name was scrawled across the front in my handwriting. I know, I said, handing it to him. That's why I filed for divorce last month. I was just waiting for the right moment to tell you. The shock on his face was almost enough to dull my own pain. You, what? I didn't know about Sienna or Eliot, I admitted, but I knew there was someone. I just didn't care to chase the details anymore. The fire just gave me a cleaner way out. He stared at me, the envelope heavy in his hand. Behind us, the evacuation sirens wailed again, urging everyone inside. I turned to walk back toward the gym, not waiting for him to follow. For the first time in years, the weight in my chest eased. The fire might have taken our home. But it also burned away the last illusion I had about the man I married. And in the ashes, there was room for something new, something that belonged only to me.